The locksmith's drill was still whining behind the door. I turned my key in the new lock. It didn't turn at all. Nothing. Not a click. Not a give. Just cold brass sliding against cold brass in the porch light Charles hung with his own two hands in 1987. I stood there in my good church coat, choir robe still folded over my arm. I tried the key again. Slower this time. Like maybe I'd done it wrong the first time. Like maybe 31 years of turning that same lock had somehow left me. It hadn't left me. The lock had left the key. Inside, I could hear the television. Blue light flickering against the curtains, I'd hemmed myself. My son was in there. Terence. 37 years old. He did not come to the door. I set my purse down on the porch rail. I did not knock. I want you to understand that. I did not knock. I did not call his name through the door. I did not do a single thing that would have made a neighbour look twice. I just stood there in the cold, on the porch my husband built, holding a key that no longer meant anything. 3 days later, the envelope came. Plain white. No return address. My name typed, not written. That told me something all by itself. Terence has beautiful handwriting. The nuns used to praise it back at Immaculate Heart. A man does not type his own mother's name on an envelope. Not unless he can't stand to look at it in his own hand. Inside was one key. Just the one. No note. No explanation. A brass key, still warm from wherever it had been sitting. Like it had only just been cut. That was the whole message. That was everything my son had to say to me. After 63 years of my life. After 37 years of his. A key in an envelope. The way you'd mail somebody a receipt. Here is the one thing you need before I go any further. I am not a woman who exaggerates. My name never left that deed. Not once. Not for one single day since Charles Marchand poured the foundation on Yaupon Street in the spring of 1987. Whatever my son believed he owned when he called that locksmith, he did not own it. He never had. So on that Monday morning, while the whole town of Belhaven was still sleeping off its Christmas dinner, I put on my good grey coat. I drove to First Delta Savings and Trust on Main Street. I called a man named Ruben Castile before I even parked the car, but that part comes later. Let me take you back to where this actually started. You need to understand who I am before you understand what I did. My name is Odessa Marchand. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years reading insurance codes at Baton Rouge General, catching the numbers that didn't add up before they ever reached a patient's bill. I have deep brown skin that still catches the porch light the way it did when I was young. Silver locks I pin back every Sunday for the 10 o'clock service. A mother's quilt folded at the foot of my guest bed. It has outlived 3 moves and 1 flood. I keep Mount Olive Baptist's collection books on Sunday afternoons. Pastor Willis says I have an eye for the number that's lying. I have never once told him that 31 years in a hospital billing office will do that to a person. I did not raise my voice on the porch that Christmas Eve. I did not raise it 3 days later, holding that key in my palm like a small, cold stone. People who know me will tell you I never do. 6 months before that key came in the mail, everything looked ordinary. That's the part I need you to see clearly. It is the part Terence and his wife's family never bothered to look at. It was a Sunday in June, hot enough that the church fans were working overtime. I was at my kitchen table with Mount Olive's ledger spread out in front of me, going line by line through the electric and water bills the deacon board pays out of the building fund. I found it in about 4 minutes. A line item, $340, billed twice in the same quarter to the parish gas account. I didn't even look up from my coffee. I just circled it in red pencil, wrote a note in the margin, called twice, same invoice number, request credit. That's 31 years of habit. You learn to see the number that doesn't belong, the way some people learn to spot a wrong note in a hymn. Terence called that same afternoon. He does that sometimes. Calls right when I'm elbow deep in something, like he can feel it and wants my attention split. He'd married Ashley Boykin 8 months earlier, a sweet enough girl on her own. Quiet, the kind who defers to her mother on absolutely everything, including, it would turn out, things that were none of her mother's business. "Mama, we're doing a cookout Saturday," he said. "Ashley's folks are coming. You should come by." I went. Of course I went. He is my only child. I have never once let pride keep me from a cookout. Deborah Boykin was already holding court in my son's backyard when I arrived, a glass of sweet tea in one hand, gesturing at the house like she was appraising it for sale, which, as it turned out later, was not far from the truth. "Odessa," she said when she saw me, drawing my name out like she was doing me a favour by remembering it correctly. Small thing. I noticed it anyway. She'd called me Denise twice at the wedding, once more at Thanksgiving. Every single time she'd apologised with a laugh, like the mistake was mine to forgive rather than hers to fix. "Deborah," I said, and I smiled, because that is what I do. She walked me through my own son's kitchen like she'd designed it herself, tapping the countertop, running a hand along the cabinet Charles had built with his own hands the winter before he passed. "This house has good bones," she said. "Terence tells me it's been in the family a good while." "Since 1987, I said. "My husband built most of it himself." "Well, it shows," she said, in a tone I've heard my whole life, the kind that means the opposite of what the words say. Then she looked at me, still smiling, and she said the thing I would carry with me for the next 6 months. "You know, at your age, it might be a comfort. Let the paperwork go to someone who understands how these things are supposed to be handled. Property gets complicated. You want someone equipped for it." I have heard that sentence before, in different rooms, from different mouths, wearing different clothes. I heard a version of it from a hospital administrator in 2009. She called me one of the good ones, the same week she gave my promotion to a woman with 4 fewer years and half my accuracy. I heard it from a loan officer's assistant that very same summer, a young woman who called First Delta's escrow line and asked to speak to the homeowner. When I said that was me, she asked, not unkindly, if I was perhaps the housekeeper who handles the bills. I did not correct Deborah Boykin in her son-in-law's backyard. I smiled and I said, "I've always been equipped just fine." I refilled my tea. I watched my son laugh at something Deborah's husband said. Not once, not even for a second, did Terence look over to see if his mother needed him to say something back. That's the part that hurt, not Deborah. Deborah is exactly who she has always been. I stopped expecting different from her the day she called me Denise the second time. It was Terence's silence that hurt. My son, the one I raised alone after Charles passed, standing 3 feet away, saying nothing. A woman he'd known for less than a year told his mother she wasn't equipped to hold on to property his own father built plank by plank. I drove home that night. I did not cry. I don't do that either, not where anyone can see it. I went into the hall closet instead. I looked at the tin tackle box on the top shelf, the one Charles always called his junk box, the one I'd been told never to throw away for reasons he'd never fully explained. I didn't open it. Not that night. I just looked at it. The way you look at a locked door, you already know the shape of the key to. I want to tell you something about my husband. He is the reason none of what happened next actually worked the way Terence and the Boykins thought it would. Charles Marchand was a pipe fitter for 38 years, first at the refinery outside Baton Rouge, then freelance for whoever needed a man who could read a blueprint and fix what was actually broken instead of what looked broken. He built this house himself, board by board, on land his own father had scraped together the money to buy back in 1961. Back when a black man buying land in Ascension Parish meant driving 40 miles to a different bank, because the closest one wouldn't finance him. Charles was quiet the way I'm quiet. He didn't raise his voice either, but he noticed things. He noticed long before I did that Terence had a habit of signing whatever was put in front of him, if the person doing the asking smiled wide enough. He noticed it when Terence co-signed a car loan for a college roommate who vanished with the truck. He noticed it again when Terence was 26, newly married to his first wife. He put his name on a business loan for a barbecue restaurant. It folded within a year, a loan Charles and I quietly paid off ourselves, so it wouldn't follow our son around forever. "He'll sign anything with a smile in the room," Charles told me once. Not unkindly, more like a man noting a crack in a foundation he intended to shore up before it spread. I love that boy. I'm not going to pretend he's careful. In 1998, 11 years after he built this house, Charles walked into First Delta Savings and Trust. He asked to speak to a young loan officer named Ruben Castile, the same man who'd financed our mortgage back in '87, when he was barely out of banking school himself. I didn't know what they discussed that day. Charles came home and told me only that he'd taken care of some paperwork. I had learned, 31 years ago, not to ask more questions than necessary. Not of a man handling something carefully, So I let it be. I would not understand what that paperwork was, not until the day I opened that tin box myself, sitting at my sister Patrice's kitchen table, 4 years after Charles was gone, 3 days after my own son mailed me a key to a house I already owned. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let me stay in June a little longer. The summer mattered. It's where the trap started closing, slow enough that nobody but me seemed to notice it happening. By August, Terence had stopped calling on Sundays. Small thing. He used to call every Sunday after church, just to check in, ask about my knees, tell me some story about work. That August, the calls thinned to every other week. Then to texts, short ones, the kind that don't invite a real answer. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I kept teaching Sunday school, kept the church books, kept driving past the house on Yaupon Street that I'd signed for and Charles had built, watching Ashley's car in the driveway more often than my son's truck. In September, Deborah Boykin bought a new car. A truck, actually. A big one. Chrome everywhere. Parked proudly in her own driveway 2 streets over from the church. I heard about it from Patrice, who heard about it from a woman in her Bible study, who'd heard about it from Deborah herself, at a hair appointment, bragging that things were finally coming together for the family. I did not think much of it at the time. A truck is a truck. People buy things. It would be months before I understood what that truck actually was, and what it was quietly doing to everyone connected to it. October brought the boat. Precision has been my whole career. It was exactly what none of them expected from me. Terence's brother-in-law, Ashley's older brother Deshaun, had been talking for a year about a fishing boat. Something to take out on the river on weekends. In October he got one. A 22-foot bass boat, $31,000, financed. The loan co-signed, as it would later turn out, by both Ashley's parents. And without my knowledge at the time, using paperwork that listed my son's address as collateral security. Because Terence, being Terence, had told his in-laws with a smile that the house was basically his. It was not basically his. It was never basically his. But I did not know that particular detail yet. Not in October. And neither, I suspect, did Terence fully understand what he'd agreed to when he signed whatever piece of paper Deborah slid in front of him. At that cookout. Or the one after it. Or the one after that. What I did know by November was that my son had stopped meeting my eyes at Thanksgiving. We had dinner at my house that year, same as always. Same table Charles built the year before Terence started high school. Deborah came. Her husband came. Ashley's brother Deshaun came, talking loudly about the boat the whole meal. How it handled. How much they'd already put into the motor. I sat at the head of the table, where I've sat every Thanksgiving since Charles passed. I watched my son avoid looking at me every time Deborah mentioned when the house gets sorted properly. Sorted properly. She said it twice that dinner, once about the property taxes, which she seemed to believe Terence was paying. He was not. I had quietly been covering the escrow account myself for 2 years by then, a fact none of them knew, a fact none of them thought to check. And once about the deed situation. A phrase she said lightly, reaching for the cornbread, like she was discussing the weather. I did not ask what she meant by the deed situation. I already had a fairly good idea. Asking would have told her I was paying attention. I have found, in 31 years of catching numbers that don't belong, one simple thing. The surest way to let something reveal itself fully is to let the person doing the revealing believe nobody is watching. So I watched. I passed the cornbread. I refilled Deborah's tea, the way I'd refilled it at the cookout. I smiled. I said nothing. Inside, where none of them could see it, I was doing the same thing I'd done with that church ledger back in June. I was circling the number that didn't belong. By December, the picture was clear enough. I stopped needing anyone to confirm it out loud. The boat payment was late. I knew this because Patrice's Bible study friend, the one connected to Deborah through the hair salon, mentioned it in passing, the way small towns mention everything eventually. The truck payment, I would learn later, was late too. 60 days by Christmas. That is the kind of number a bank does not forget, even when a family does. And somewhere in all of that, my son had started telling people things. Quietly. Carefully. In rooms I was not in. That the house on Yaupon Street would be in his name properly by spring, so it could help float things until Deshaun got back on his feet. Those were his own words to Ashley. She repeated them to me herself later, in a different context entirely. Float things. My husband's house. the one he built with his own hands from a foundation his father had bled for the money to buy, was going to float his brother-in-law's boat payment. I did not know all of this on Christmas Eve. I knew enough. I knew the shape of it. The way you know a storm is coming from the colour of the sky before the first drop falls. What I did not expect, what genuinely surprised me, even after everything, was that my own son would choose that particular night. The night of the candlelight service. The one night a year Charles and I never missed. To have the locks changed on a house that had never once, not for a single day, belonged to him. I found out from a neighbour, actually, before I even got home. Miss Ruthie, 3 doors down, called my cell while I was still in the church parking lot. Choir robe over my arm, candle wax cooling on my fingers. "Odessa," she said, "there's a man out front of your place with a truck that says locksmith on the side. Terence let him in around 6. I thanked her. I got in my car. I drove home slow. The way I always drive on Christmas Eve. The roads get icy sometimes, even in Louisiana. Slowing down has never once in my life made a hard thing worse, and that is how I ended up standing on my own front porch, in my good coat, holding a key that no longer opened a single lock in the house my husband built. Listening to my son's television through a door he would not open. I did not knock. I got back in my car. I drove to Patrice's house. I slept in her guest room under my mother's old quilt. In the morning, Christmas morning, I made coffee in my sister's kitchen. I said only one thing out loud to myself, the way I have said it to myself for 31 years. Every time a number showed up where it didn't belong. "I don't get loud," I said. "I get the paperwork right." 3 days later, the key came in the mail. Here is what I did with that key. I put it on the little dish by Patrice's front door, next to her spare car key, next to a button that fell off her coat 2 winters ago. I did not throw it away. I did not send it back with a note either, though I thought about it for exactly one night. Instead, on Monday morning, I called Ruben Castille. I have known Ruben since 1987. He was 24 years old the day he approved our mortgage. A skinny young man in a suit 1 size too big. So nervous about his first loan approval. He double-checked the numbers 3 times in front of Charles and me. 38 years later, he runs the branch. Same bank, same building, new carpet. "Odessa," he said, when he picked up. "Merry belated Christmas." "Ruben," I said, "I need you to pull a file for me, whenever you have a minute this week." "What file?" "The house on Yaupon Street, and whatever Charles filed with you back in 98. There was a pause on the line, not a long one, just long enough for a careful man to decide how careful to be back. "I remember that file," Ruben said. "I'll pull it today." I did not tell him about the locks. I did not tell him about the key in the envelope, or Deborah's truck, or the boat, or the phrase sorted properly. I have found that the fewer people know what you're circling, the cleaner the circle stays. Ruben didn't need the story, he needed the request. That's how you keep a receipts keeper honest. You give him the paper, not the drama. He called back that same afternoon. "It's here," he said. "Everything Charles filed. You want to come in, or you want me to read it to you over the phone?" "I'll come in Thursday," I said. "After my hair appointment. I want you to understand something about me at this point in the story. I already suspected what was in that file. I had suspected it for months. Ever since Deborah said the words "the deed situation" over my son's cornbread. What I did not yet know was the exact shape of it. The exact words. The date. The seal. Thursday came. I sat across from Ruben's desk. A small office. A window looking out over the parking lot. He slid a manila folder toward me the way you'd slide a difficult diagnosis toward a patient. Slow. Careful. Giving me time to brace. "Your husband came in here in 1998, Ruben said. "November." I remember because it was right after the LSU game. He made a joke about the score I still think about sometimes. I smiled. That sounds exactly like Charles. "He wanted to add a survivorship clause to the deed," Ruben said. "It's not complicated, but it's not nothing either. It means the property passes to the named survivor automatically, outside of any will, outside of probate. No court involved. It just happens. The moment one owner is gone." "He named me," I said. It wasn't a question. "He named you," Ruben said. "Sole owner. Recorded at the parish courthouse in December of 1998. It's been sitting there for 27 years, Odessa. Nobody's touched it. Nobody's contested it. It's clean." I sat with that for a moment. 27 years. My husband had walked into this exact building. He'd made a joke about a football score and quietly built a wall around me, one that neither of us would need for almost 3 decades. "There's something else," Reuben said. He pulled a second, smaller envelope from the back of the folder. My name was on it, in Charles's handwriting this time. Not typed, written. I did not open it there, I put it in my purse. I thanked Reuben. I drove to Patrice's house. I sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee, going cold beside me. Then I finally slid my finger under the flap. "Keep the tin," the note said. "Everything that matters fits in something small." That's when I remembered the tackle box. I called Patrice into the kitchen. She sat down across from me. I went and got the box off my own hall closet shelf, the one I hadn't cleared out of my house yet. I still had my key to the shed out back. Inside the box, under 3 decades of fishing lures and a broken reel, was a second folder. Older, the edges soft with handling. Inside it was the original 1987 deed, a copy of the 1998 amendment. And one more thing I hadn't expected, a handwritten list, dated the same November as the amendment, in Charles's tight block print. "Things Terence should never have to carry alone," it said at the top. Underneath 6 lines. The barbecue loan, $9,200. Paid in full, 1994. The roommate's car, $4,000. Paid in full, 1991. The house, protected, 1998. 3 more lines below that, dated later, in a slightly shakier hand, closer to when he passed. A line about a personal loan, $6,500, Terence had asked for in 2019. Charles had quietly co-signed it. He'd paid it down himself. He never told either of us. A note that read simply, "He doesn't know how close he's come. Keep watching." Patrice read it over my shoulder. She didn't say a word for a long moment. Then she said the only thing that needed saying. "Charles saw this coming 27 years ago." "He saw the shape of it," I said. "Not the details, not Deborah, not the boat, but the shape." I did not feel triumphant sitting at that table. I felt something closer to grief, freshly opened. The way grief comes back sometimes on an ordinary Tuesday, for no reason at all. My husband had spent the last years of his life quietly protecting a son who never knew he needed protecting. I was the only one left to finish the job. So I finished it. That week, I did 3 things, none of them loud. First, I called my insurance agent. I confirmed, in writing, that the homeowner's policy on Yalpon Street was in my name alone. I had been the one paying the premium for 2 years. Terence had quietly stopped contributing, without telling me why, $1,100 a year. I had the receipts. Second, I called the parish tax office. I confirmed the same thing about the property taxes, $2,200 a year, paid from my account, every November, 2 years running. My son told his in-laws it was handled. Third, and this is the part I want you to really hear, I stopped. I did not cancel anything out of spite. Precision has been my whole life. I simply let both payments come due in my own name, the way they were always legally supposed to. I let the escrow notices go to the address that was actually on file, which was mine, not Terence's. I was not paying his bills anymore in secret. I was just finally letting the truth show up in the mailbox where it belonged. That's the whole of what I did that week. I did not call a lawyer. Not yet. I did not confront Terence. Not yet. I did not tell Deborah Boykin one single word about a survivorship clause, or a tackle box, or a dead man's handwriting. I went to church, I taught Sunday school, I kept Mount Olive's ledger. I found one more billing error in January. $410. I circled it in red pencil, the same as always, but I watched Yalpon Street, quietly. The way you watch a pot you know is about to boil. By late January, word came back through Patrice. Her Bible study friend heard it straight from Deborah, at the salon. The truck payment had gone from 60 days late to 90. The boat lender had sent a certified letter. Deshawn had lost 2 shifts at his job. He could not cover his half of anything anymore. I heard, too, that Deborah had started talking, more insistently now, about getting Terence's name properly on that house, so they could borrow against the equity, so they could get everybody current. She said it at a hair appointment, loud enough for 3 other women to hear. One of them attended Mount Olive, too. She mentioned it to me herself the following Sunday. Gently, the way you'd mention something you weren't sure you should. Odessa, she said, I don't want to speak out of turn, but somebody at the Curl Palace said your son's mother-in-law's been telling folks something, that the house on Yaupon Street is basically already theirs to work with. Is that right? I said. That's what I heard. I thanked her for telling me. I meant it. In a town like Belhaven, the truth travels through hair salons and church pews faster than certified mail. I have never once looked down on that. It has served me well my whole life. I called Terence that same Sunday afternoon. First time I'd called him since Christmas Eve. He picked up on the fourth ring. Mama, he said. Careful voice. The voice of a man who suspects he's in trouble and isn't sure how much. I heard the house might be getting used as collateral, I said. Flat. No heat in it at all. For a refinance. To help Deshawn with the boat. Silence on the line. Long enough that I counted it. The way Charles used to count things. Though I never told Charles I did that too. Ashley's parents think it makes sense, Terence finally said, since I'm going to inherit it eventually anyway. Eventually, I said, is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Mama. I'm not angry, I said. I meant that too, mostly. I want you to talk to Ruben Castile before you sign anything with anybody. That's all I'm asking. Talk to Ruben first. Why Ruben? Because your father talked to him first too, I said. A long time ago. Ask him about it. I hung up before Terence could ask me anything else. Not because I was hiding something dramatic. I have found, in 31 years of watching people discover mistakes in their own paperwork, that the discovery lands cleaner a certain way. When it comes from the paper itself, not from his mother's mouth, from the deed. From Ruben's steady voice, reading a clause aloud. From the truth simply sitting there. The way it had been sitting there since 1998. Waiting for somebody to finally open the right drawer. I did not know, calling Ruben that same evening to warn him, that a refinance conversation might be coming so soon. I did not know the actual appointment would happen barely 2 weeks later. I did not know Deborah Boykin herself would be sitting at that conference table when it did. I did not know either that the boat lender's certified letter contained a line that would matter more than anyone in that family understood yet. But I'll get to that. What I knew on that Sunday evening was this. I was hanging up my kitchen phone, looking out at the porch light Charles hung with his own hands almost 40 years earlier. My son had finally asked the right question, even if he didn't know it yet. He had asked why Ruben, and somewhere between that question and the answer, something was finally about to come into the light. The whole shape of what his father built for him. Quietly, patiently, without a single raised voice. I did not get loud, I never do. I just made sure the paperwork was ready to speak for itself. I want to tell you about a Sunday morning that fell right in the middle of all of this. It grounded me in a way nothing else did that winter. It was late January, 2 weeks before I called Terence about the refinance rumour. Mount Olive was full for the early service. Choir robes lined up in the vestibule. My own robe pressed the night before, the way it always is. I sang alto that morning, third row, between a woman named Yvonne Prater and my sister Patrice. Pastor Willis preached on patience, of all things. The kind of sermon that lands differently depending on what you're carrying into the pew. Patience is not passivity, he said from the pulpit, his voice carrying easy over the fans, working against the cold. Patience is a woman who already knows how the story ends. She's simply waiting for everybody else to catch up. I sat with that the whole service. I thought about my mother's quilt, folded at the foot of my guest bed. I thought about the silver in my hair, pinned back the way it always is on Sundays. About the deep brown of my own hands, folded in my lap. Hands that had spent 31 years finding numbers that didn't belong. I thought about the tin tackle box on Patrice's sideboard. I thought about Charles, singing bass in the row behind me for 30-some years, before his voice went quiet for good. After service, in the fellowship hall, over coffee and a good sheet cake somebody's daughter had baked for a birthday, Yvonne pulled me aside. Odessa, she said low. I heard a little something. About your son's in-laws and the house. You heard right some of it, I said. Not all of it. You holding up all right? I'm holding up the way I always do, I said. Quiet. Yvonne smiled at that, the particular smile of a woman who has known me long enough to recognise my own patterns, better than I sometimes do myself. You know, she said, my grandmother used to say something. About women like us. She said the Lord gives some women a loud voice for the fight. And he gives some women a quiet one. The quiet one usually wins, because nobody sees it coming until it's already done. I have thought about that sentence many times since. I did not win because I was clever, though I like to think I was careful. I did not win because I was owed anything by the universe for the years I'd already given. I won, if that's even the right word for it. Because women like Yvonne, like Patrice, like my own late mother, had taught daughters something simple, for generations. Dignity does not require volume. Paperwork, properly kept, outlives every loud voice raised against it. I finished my coffee that morning. I hugged Yvonne goodbye. I drove back to Patrice's house with the church bulletin folded on the passenger seat. The same bulletin that would, 3 weeks later, carry the announcement for the Marchand Hour. Neither of us knew that yet. Just two ordinary women drinking coffee on an ordinary cold Sunday in January. I want you to understand something about all of this, something I did not fully understand myself until much later. This was never really a story about a locked door, or a mailed key, or even a tackle box full of old paperwork. It was a story about what gets handed down, quietly, from person to person, generation to generation. When nobody is watching, and nobody expects a reward for it. Charles handed something down to me in 1998. My mother handed something down to me long before that, in a kitchen, much smaller than the one on Yupon Street, in a town much smaller than Belhaven. And now, whether Terence fully understood it yet or not, I was handing something down to him too. The same quiet lesson, repeated in a new key for a new generation. Some things you inherit on paper, some things you inherit in your hands, in your spine, in the particular way you hold a room's silence until it finally tells you the truth. I had both kinds now. I intended to use them. Terence did talk to Reuben. Eventually. It took him 9 days. I know because Reuben called me on the 9th day. A Tuesday right after his lunch. He said only one sentence before I even asked. "Your son came by today." And? I told him what I told you, Reuben said. I didn't tell him about the note. Or the tackle box. That part wasn't mine to give away. Thank you, Reuben. He didn't take it well, Odessa. I want you to know that, going in. He got quiet. Then he asked if there was any way to undo it. I sat with that for a second. Undo it. As if a deed his own father recorded 27 years ago was a mistake in a checkbook. As if grief and protection could be reversed with the right form. There isn't, I said. Is there? No, Reuben said. There isn't. I thanked him again. I hung up. I sat at Patrice's kitchen table for a long while, looking at nothing in particular. I want to tell you the truth about that moment. Part of me wanted to call Terence right then. Part of me wanted to drive over, sit him down, put my hand over his, the way I used to when he was small and scared of the dark. But I had learned something else in 31 years of reading other people's mistakes off a billing sheet. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a grown man is let the number sit there, long enough that he has to look at it himself. So I waited. 2 days later, Terence called me, not a text. A call. "Mama," he said, "can we talk?" Of course. He came to Patrice's house that Thursday evening. Same kitchen table where I'd read Charles's letter. For the first time in 6 months, he looked at me the whole time he was talking. Not at his phone, not out the window. At me. "I didn't know," he said. "About the amendment." "I swear to you, Mama, I didn't know. I believe you," I said. And I did. Deborah's been saying the house was basically already ours to work with. I let myself believe it. It was easier than asking hard questions. I signed papers I didn't fully read at the cookout. I told Ashley things I wasn't sure of, because it felt good to sound like I had it handled. I let him talk. I have found that people rarely need you to finish their sentence for them. They need you to let the sentence exist in the room, long enough that they can hear themselves say it. "Why'd you change the locks?" I finally asked, not angry, just needing the answer. He looked down at his hands. Deborah said it would show good faith, to her and Deshawn, that if the house was going to help the family, it needed to feel like it was already ours. I thought... He stopped. I thought if I just did it, it would stop feeling like a lie. "It's not your house, Terence," I said, gently as I have ever said anything true in my life. It was never your house to make feel like anything. He nodded. He didn't argue. That, more than anything he said that night, told me my son still had something worth protecting in him. There's a meeting, he said after a while. Next Tuesday, at the bank. Deborah set it up before any of this, to talk about refinancing, to help Deshawn with the boat and the truck both, using the house. I know, I said. You know. Reuben told me it might be coming. Terence sat with that. Are you going to stop it? I'm not going to do anything at all, I said. I'm going to sit in that meeting, if you'll let me come. I'm going to let the paperwork do what paperwork does. He looked at me for a long moment, something in his face I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, the exact look he used to get right before admitting to a broken window. Or a failed test. Not fear exactly, recognition. Okay, he said, come. I want to pause here and tell you something about Deborah Boykin. The next part of this story belongs to her as much as it belongs to my son. I don't think it's fair to let her stay a cartoon in your mind. She is not a monster. She is a woman who has spent her whole life believing confidence is the same thing as competence, that a certain kind of polish excuses a certain kind of carelessness. She raised 3 children on her own for a stretch after her first husband left. She has genuinely tried in her own way to hold her family together with whatever tools she had, but she's also spent 30 years assuming things about women who look like me. I want to say that plainly. I've spent my whole life being polite about it. Politeness has its place, but so does clarity. When Deborah looked at me in my son's kitchen, she did not see a woman who spent 31 years catching errors that would have cost a hospital system millions if they'd gone unnoticed. She saw someone she assumed hadn't thought that far ahead. Someone who, in her words, needed the paperwork handled by people who understood how these things worked. She was not the first person to make that mistake about me. She would not, I suspect, be the last. But she would be, very soon. One of the more expensive ones. The week before the meeting, 2 more things happened. I want to walk you through both. They matter to what came next. The first was a phone call from an unfamiliar number. It turned out to be the collections department for the marine lender that had financed Deshawn's boat. A young man, polite enough, asked to confirm something. Whether the property at Yupon Street was available as a secondary asset for a refinance application submitted under Terence Marchand's name. I told him calmly that the property was not in Terence Marchand's name. It had never been in Terence Marchand's name. Any application listing it as his asset would need to be corrected before it went any further. I gave him Reuben's direct line at First Delta. I told him to confirm it there. He thanked me. He apologised for the confusion. He said something I want you to hear exactly right. Someone had represented the property as jointly held. They just needed it cleared up for the file. Someone had represented it. That's a careful, bureaucratic way of saying something. My son, or Deborah, or both of them together, had told a bank something that was not true. On paper. In an application, a federal lender would review under penalty of fraud, if it went uncorrected. I did not raise my voice with that young man. I thanked him for calling. I hung up. I sat very still for a moment. That call told me something the tackle box and the survivorship clause hadn't yet. This was no longer just a family misunderstanding about who inherits what someday. This was, potentially, paperwork that could put my son in real legal trouble. Not just family trouble. If it wasn't corrected before that Tuesday meeting. I called Reuben that same evening. I need you to be very precise on Tuesday, I told him. Not for my sake. For Terence's. If that application already lists the house as collateral without my authorization, that needs to come out cleanly. On the record, before anybody signs anything else. Understood, Reuben said. I'll have the file corrected and documented before the meeting starts. The second thing happened 3 days later. On a Sunday. At Mount Olive, of all places. I was in the church office going through the collection ledger, same as every week. Pastor Willis mentioned, almost in passing, that Deborah Boykin had approached him after the early service, asking about estate planning resources for young families building generational wealth. He said it lightly, the way you'd mention any small piece of church gossip. But something in it made me set my pencil down. She used those exact words, I asked. Generational wealth? She did, Pastor Willis said. Asked if the church had a financial literacy program. Said she wanted her daughter's family to be set up properly. Some folks in the family, in her words, weren't as forward-thinking as they should be. I did not need him to tell me which folks she meant. I already knew. I thanked Pastor Willis. I went back to the ledger. I found that very afternoon one more small error. $42, mislabeled in the youth fund. I circled it in red pencil the way I always do. For just a moment sitting in that quiet office, afternoon light coming through the stained glass, I let myself think about everything Deborah Boykin didn't know yet. She didn't know about the tackle box. She didn't know about the note in Charles's handwriting. She didn't know the Marine Lenders Collections Department had already called me directly. She didn't know Ruben Castile was, at that very moment, correcting a federal loan file, removing language that could have exposed her son-in-law to a fraud allegation, one she herself had encouraged. She didn't know that a word she'd used twice now, in 2 different rooms, was about to come back on her. Not equipped, not forward-thinking, not understanding how these things were supposed to be handled. It was about to be handed right back to her, across a conference table, by a man who had approved my mortgage before her daughter was even born. I finished the ledger, I locked the office, I drove home to Patrice's house. That night, for the first time since Christmas Eve, I slept the whole night through. Tuesday was 4 days away. There was one more conversation before Tuesday, and it happened somewhere I didn't expect. It was a Thursday afternoon, the week before the meeting. I had stopped by Baton Rouge General for a routine appointment, the kind you keep at 63 whether you feel like it or not. The billing office was on my way out, past the elevator, and old habits die slower than most things in this life. I stopped in, out of reflex, to say hello to a woman named Carol Fontenot. She'd trained under me my last 5 years there, before I retired. Odessa Marchand, she said, standing up from her desk, genuine warmth in her voice. Look at you. Retirement suits you. We talked for a few minutes, the easy kind of talk between 2 women who'd spent years correcting other people's mistakes for a living. Then, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned something that stopped me cold. Funny thing, Carol said. We had a call last month from a collections agency, verifying employment history for somebody named Deborah Boykin. Said she used to work reception here years back, before the dental office. You know her? I know her, I said carefully. Why were they calling? Why were verifying income for a loan application? Carol said. Standard stuff. Except the numbers she gave didn't match what we had on file from years ago. Off by a good bit. I flagged it and moved on. Not my business what people put on their own paperwork. I thanked Carol. I left that building with something new sitting heavy in my chest. Something I hadn't expected to carry out of a hospital hallway. Deborah Boykin had been inflating old income figures, apparently, for more than just the Yaupon Street refinance. This had been going on longer than 6 months. Longer, maybe, than any of us fully understood yet. I did not share that detail with Ruben right away. I sat with it instead, turning it over the way I turn over any number that doesn't add up. I thought about what it actually meant. Not that Deborah was simply desperate, that she had been desperate for a long time, quietly patching one hole with another. The way people do when they've never learned there's a difference between surviving a bad month and building an actual foundation. I thought too about myself, at 40, at 50, at every age along the way. How many times could I have taken a shortcut like that, and didn't? Not because I was a better person necessarily, because Charles had built something under me early enough. I never had to reach for one. That is the whole quiet argument for what my husband did in 1998. Not that Deborah Boykin was evil for scrambling, that scrambling people make worse and worse decisions the longer nobody stops them. Somebody, eventually, has to be the wall that finally holds. I called Patrice that evening. I told her what Carol had said. She was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. That poor woman, Patrice finally said. I want you to notice that. She said, poor woman. Not that woman. I have thought about that distinction more than once since. She's not poor in the way that excuses what she said to me, I said. But she's poor in a way I understand better now than I did in June. Does that change what you're going to do Tuesday? I thought about that question longer than I expected to. No, I said finally. It changes how I'll feel about it afterward. Not what I have to do in that room. Patrice agreed those were different things. She was right. I want you to hold on to that distinction too. I think it's the whole difference between justice and cruelty. Cruelty enjoys the unravelling. Justice simply lets it happen clearly without flinching, and grieves quietly for how avoidable it always was. I drove home that night past the church, its stained glass dark, its parking lot empty. I thought about Mount Olive's ledger, the one I'd keep going through week after week, catching small errors before they became large ones. I thought about how much of my whole life had been spent doing exactly that, catching a small thing before it grew teeth. I thought about how much smaller Deborah Boykin's whole crisis might have stayed. If somebody, anybody, had caught her small errors 5 years earlier, the way I had always tried to catch mine. But nobody had. Now it was 4 days from a conference table. The only thing left to do was let the numbers finally speak. There's something I skipped past, and it matters. Between the day Terence came to Patrice's table and the day of the bank meeting, there was a Sunday dinner. It's the dinner where I understood, fully for the first time, just how deep the Boykins had dug themselves. It was Deborah's idea, actually. She called me herself, which surprised me. Her voice warm, in that particular way that always meant she wanted something. "Odessa," she said, "let's put the awkwardness behind us. Family dinner. My house this time. Sunday." I said yes, of course I said yes. I have found, in 31 years of reading numbers that don't belong, something useful. A dinner invitation from someone circling a mistake is worth more than any conversation you could force. I arrived at 6, my good grey coat again, a sweet potato pie in my hands. I do not walk into anyone's home empty-handed. Deborah's house was smaller than Terence's, tidier, in a way that felt performed, every surface arranged like it was expecting a photograph. Ashley let me in. Terence was already at the table, quiet, watching his mother-in-law with a new kind of caution. Deshawn arrived last, 20 minutes late, in a mood I can only describe as cornered. He barely spoke through the salad course. When he finally did speak, it was to answer a question nobody had asked. "The Marine has been calling," he said, to no one in particular, staring at his plate. "About the slip fee, on top of the loan." "Deshawn," Deborah said, sharp. Quick, the way you'd correct a child in front of company. "What?" he said. "She's family now. She's going to hear about it eventually." I did not say anything. I passed the greens, I let the table sit in its own discomfort. I have learned to let discomfort do its own work. "How much is the slip fee?" I finally asked. Gently. Not accusatory, just a woman asking a number, the way I've asked numbers my whole career. $400 a month, Deshawn said, on top of the note, which is already... He stopped himself. "Already what?" I asked. "Already 6 weeks behind," he said. "Almost 7. Deborah's jaw tightened. This particular number had not been shared with her fully. Not until that exact moment, at her own dinner table, in front of the mother-in-law she'd spent 6 months treating as an obstacle to root around. "That boat is going back to the lender if we don't figure something out by March," Deshawn said, still not looking up. "I already got the letter." "What letter?" Terence asked. "The one that says they'll repossess," Deshawn said, "if the account's not brought current." I watched Deborah's face during that exchange. I want to describe it honestly. It is not a cruel thing to notice, only a true one. She looked for just a moment, like a woman watching a wall she had personally built begin leaning under its own weight. Not yet falling, just leaning. The look of someone realizing, mid-sentence, that the story they've told themselves for months has holes in it. "We'll figure it out," she said, to the table, to herself mostly. "Once the house situation is settled, we'll have options." "The house situation," I repeated. Not a question, just letting the phrase sit in the air a moment. "The refinance," Deborah said, "once it goes through." "Ah," I said. I did not say anything else about it that night. I ate my pie. I complimented Ashley on the cornbread. Genuinely, because it was good cornbread. Better than mine. And I told her so. I let Terence walk me to my car afterward. In the driveway, under a streetlight that buzzed faintly, he finally said what he'd been holding all through dinner. "Mama, how bad is it?" "With Deshawn's boat?" "I don't know the exact numbers," I said, "but I know something. A man 6 weeks behind on a note and a slip fee both isn't sleeping well at night. And a family that's been telling itself the house will fix that. Before anyone's checked whose name is on it, that family is in trouble." "You knew," Terence said. "Before tonight. You already knew some of this." "I knew enough," I said. "I've known enough for months." "I told you, Terence, I don't get loud. I get the numbers right." He was quiet for a moment, leaning against my car door. The porch light from Deborah's house threw his shadow long across the driveway. "Are you going to help them?" he asked. "The Boykins. With the boat." I looked at my son for a long moment before I answered. The honest answer mattered more than a comfortable one. "No," I said. "I'm not." "Why not?" "Because I spent 2 years quietly covering your property taxes and your insurance," I said, "so you'd never have to ask. You didn't even know I was doing it." "That's not a debt you owe me, Terence. That's just what a mother does when she can. But it is proof of something. Proof that I've already been carrying more of this family's weight than anybody noticed. I'm not going to pick up somebody else's boat payment on top of it. Not out of guilt, not out of pressure. Not from a woman who told me, to my face, that I wasn't equipped to hold onto property your own father built." Terence didn't argue. He just nodded, slow. The streetlight buzzed overhead. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I saw something in his face that looked less like guilt, more like clarity. "I've been letting her think for both of us," he said. "Deborah, since the wedding. It was just easier." "I know," I said. "Easier isn't the same as right." I drove home that night with the radio off, the way I do when I need to think. I thought about Charles's list in that tackle box, things Terence should never have to carry alone. My husband understood something about our son a long time before I fully accepted it. Terence was not weak because he was cruel. He was weak because he'd never once, in 37 years, had to be the one who held the line. Charles had always quietly held it for him. When Charles was gone, someone else stepped into that space. She filled it with confidence instead of care. My son, starving a little for the shape of being told what to do, had let her. That understanding didn't excuse the locks. It didn't excuse the key mailed with no notes. But it made the whole shape of the last 6 months clearer to me. Clearer than any single document Reuben could have pulled from a file. The following week, 2 more pieces of the picture arrived, and they matter to what happened at that bank on Tuesday. The first came from Patrice. Without my asking, she'd done a little quiet digging of her own, the kind only a retired parish records clerk can do. 40 years of friends in every office in the parish. She came to me on a Wednesday afternoon with a folder of her own, thinner than mine. She set it on her kitchen table with the satisfaction of a woman who has found something worth finding. "Deborah Boykin," Patrice said, "has 2 liens against her own house. One from a home improvement contractor, filed 8 months ago, unpaid. One from a medical collections agency, filed this past spring." "How much?" I asked. "Combined, a little over $11,000. I sat with that for a moment. $11,000 in liens, on a woman who had spent 6 months telling my son, and my church, that our family wasn't forward-thinking about generational wealth. "She's not trying to steal the house because she's wealthy and careless," Patrice said. "She's trying to steal it because she's drowning and proud. That's a different animal, Odessa. More dangerous in some ways. Prouder people panic harder." I thought about that for the rest of the week. I thought about it teaching Sunday school. I thought about it circling another billing error in Mount Olive's ledger. This one $218, misapplied to the wrong fund entirely. I thought about it lying awake in Patrice's guest room, under my mother's quilt, turning Deborah Boykin over in my mind. The way you'd turn over a coin, looking for the mint mark that tells you what it's really worth. She was drowning. That didn't make what she'd said in my son's kitchen acceptable. It didn't soften the locks in my memory, or the mailed key, or the phrase "someone who understands how these things are supposed to be handled." But it told me something useful about Tuesday, about how it would likely land. A drowning woman doesn't let go of the branch gracefully. She grabs harder, right up until the moment the branch simply isn't there. The second piece came from Reuben himself, 3 days before the meeting, a phone call he made not because he had to, because, in his words, I should hear it from him first. "There's a second application," he told me, "filed last week quietly, at a different bank across the parish line, a home equity line. Not on Yopon Street this time, on Deborah's own house. It was declined. The liens Patrice found came up in underwriting. So she tried to solve it herself first," I said, "before coming after mine." "Looks that way," Reuben said. When that failed, the Yopon Street application moved forward the following week. I don't think that's a coincidence, Odessa. I think you're looking at a woman who ran out of her own doors and started trying yours. I thanked him for telling me. I hung up. I sat for a long while at Patrice's kitchen table, the tackle box still sitting on the sideboard where I'd left it. Charles's handwriting facing up through the clear lid, like it was watching the whole thing unfold with me. I did not feel triumphant. Triumph was never really the shape of what I was carrying. I felt mostly a kind of sorrow for how much smaller this all was than it ever needed to be. A family drowning in small debts, reaching for a house that was never theirs. When one honest conversation 8 months earlier could have spared everyone the fall now 4 days from landing. But some people cannot have that conversation until the fall makes them. Tuesday was coming. I had done everything precision could do to prepare for it. What remained was simply to sit in the room and let the truth finally do the only thing it has ever reliably done in my whole life. Speak for itself. I have not told you enough yet about Yaupon Street itself. I think this is a place to do it. It explains something. Why all of this mattered so much to me, beyond the money, beyond even my son. We are not the only family on that block who has had to fight for a piece of paper. I did not know that fully until the week before the bank meeting. Reuben mentioned something almost in passing that changed the whole shape of what came after. "You're not the first this year," he said on the phone. Same call where he told me about the second application. There was a woman 2 doors down from you, Mrs. Odom. Her son-in-law tried something similar last spring. Different bank, similar shape. She had the paperwork too, thank God. Old-fashioned people like your Charles. People who did things properly a long time ago. Never made a fuss about it. I sat with that for a long moment. How many others? I asked. I couldn't say for certain, Reuben said, but I've had 3 conversations like this one in the last 18 months. All black homeowners. All older. All with younger relatives who married into families a little too eager to help themselves to something they hadn't earned. Not every young couple who marries into a family and hopes for a house is doing something wrong. Most people are not Deborah Boykin. Most in-laws never say the words she said to me in that kitchen. But there is a pattern. I have spent 31 years being paid specifically to notice patterns. I would have been lying to myself if I pretended I didn't see this one. Older black homeowners. People who built something slow and quiet, the hard way over decades. Often because the banks wouldn't make it easy any faster way. And then later someone comes along, confident, polished, certain in a way that has never once had to earn its certainty. They assume the paperwork simply hasn't been done right. They assume the elderly woman in the kitchen isn't equipped. They assume the widow with the tin box in her closet couldn't possibly have thought that far ahead. I thought about my hospital administrator in 2009, calling me one of the good ones. I thought about the loan officer's assistant who asked if I was the housekeeper. I thought about Deborah, twice in 2 different rooms, using almost the same words a corporate boardroom had used on me 16 years earlier. Someone who understands how these things are supposed to be handled. It is the same sentence, dressed differently, depending on the room. I called Mrs. Odom that same week. I had known her for years, the way you know everyone on a 3-block street in a town like Belhaven. We had never really sat down together and talked. Not about this. She made coffee. We sat at her kitchen table, almost identical to mine in shape if not in colour. She told me her story slowly, the way you tell a story you've had to carry alone. My son-in-law's family kept saying the house needed to be updated, she told me, in his name. For estate purposes. They had a lawyer draft something. I almost signed it, Odessa. I want you to know that. I almost signed it. They were so sure. I started to doubt myself. What stopped you? My daughter, she said. She read it herself before I could. She's the one who caught it. Not me. I asked if she'd ever told anyone else at the church. She said no. Not really. She'd been embarrassed, she said. Embarrassed that she'd almost let it happen. Embarrassed that she'd doubted her own judgment, even for a moment. There's nothing to be embarrassed about, I told her. They counted on the doubt. That's the whole design of it. I left her house that afternoon with an idea, small at first, the kind of idea that starts as barely more than an itch. By the time I got back to Patrice's, it had grown into something closer to a plan. I called Pastor Willis that same evening. I want to start something at the church. I told him, nothing fancy. An afternoon once a month. Anyone who wants help can bring their deed, their will, whatever paperwork they've got. We look at it together. I'll bring Reuben, maybe a lawyer if we can get one to volunteer an hour. Like Charles did for you, Pastor Willis said. Not a question. He'd known Charles almost as long as I had. Like Charles did for me, I said. Except I want to do it before anybody's standing on a porch with a key that doesn't fit anymore. Not after. Pastor Willis was quiet for a moment. I think that's one of the better ideas anybody's brought me this year, Odessa. Let's call it something simple. The Marchand Hour, maybe, since it started with you and your husband's foresight. Call it whatever helps people show up, I said. I don't need my name on it. He put my name on it anyway. I found out 3 weeks later. The church bulletin came out with the Marchand Hour printed right there under the announcements, between the youth choir rehearsal and the deacon board meeting. I will admit, reading it in Patrice's kitchen, coffee in hand, I cried for the first time since Christmas Eve. Not from sadness, from something closer to what Charles must have felt in 1998, walking out of that bank, having quietly built a wall around the people he loved, knowing most of them would never fully understand what he'd done until they needed it. I want to tell you too about Deshawn. His part in this story deserves more than a villain's footnote. He called me himself, the Thursday before the bank meeting, and that surprised me more than almost anything else that happened in those months. Miss Odessa, he said, voice tight. I wanted to call you myself. Before Tuesday, I didn't want you walking into that meeting thinking I was part of some scheme against you. I appreciate that, I said. And I meant it. I never asked whose name was on that deed, he said. I just believed what Deborah told me. It was easier. I needed the boat loan to work out. That's on me too. Not just her. Why are you telling me this now? Because my mama raised me better than to let a woman get cornered over something I helped set in motion, he said, even if I didn't mean to. I thanked him. I told him I appreciated the honesty. And I meant that. Then I told him something else. Something I hadn't planned to say until it was already out of my mouth. Whatever happens Tuesday, I said, it won't be personal against you or Ashley. It's paperwork, Deshawn, not punishment. I know, he said. I think Deborah's the only one who still believes it's something else. That conversation stayed with me all through the weekend. It told me something I needed to know, walking into that conference room 4 days later. Not everyone circling this mess was cruel. Some of them were simply drowning, exactly the way Patrice had said, grabbing at whatever branch was closest, without checking first whether it was actually theirs to grab. Deborah Boykin was drowning too. I never forgot that. Not even in the moment her face went pale across that conference table. But a drowning woman who grabs someone else's child, someone else's life's work without ever once asking permission, still has to be told. Clearly, calmly, completely. The branch she's holding was never hers. I drove to the paint store that Saturday 2 days before the meeting. I picked out a soft cream colour for the porch rail, close to the original shade Charles had chosen back in 1987, though I could no longer find the exact brand. The clerk, a young man who couldn't have been older than 25, asked me what the project was. Repainting my husband's porch rail, I told him. It's been needing it a while. Sounds like a nice project, he said, ringing up the can. It is, I said. It's overdue, but it's ready now. I drove home with the paint can on the passenger seat. I thought, the whole way, about how much of this entire story had really been about timing. Not about whether the truth existed. It had existed the whole time, sitting quietly in a tackle box, in a filing cabinet at First Delta, in the careful mind of a man who'd been dead 4 years, a man who had still somehow arranged for his family to be protected. Long after he stopped being able to protect them himself, the truth was never the question. The only real question, the whole time, was whether anyone would finally sit still long enough to let it be read out loud. Tuesday was 2 days away. Ashley called me the night before the meeting. I want to tell you about that call carefully. It is the moment I finally understood what my son had married into. It was late, past 10. Patrice was already asleep down the hall. My phone lit up with a number I hadn't saved but recognised anyway. Miss Odessa, Ashley said when I answered. Her voice was small. I hadn't heard that from her before, not at the wedding, not at any of the family dinners where she'd sat quiet beside her mother. I hope it's okay I'm calling this late. It's fine, I said. What's on your mind, Ashley? There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, the particular sound of someone building up courage, one breath at a time. I need to tell you something before tomorrow, she said, about my mama, about why she's been pushing so hard. I'm listening. She lost her job in the fall, Ashley said. The dental office where she'd worked for 11 years. They let her go. She hasn't told anybody. Not Daddy, not Deshawn. Not me, really, except I found the letter by accident, going through mail on her kitchen counter back in October. I sat with that for a moment. 11 years at a job, gone. A woman too proud to say so, even to her own children. She's been living off savings since then, Ashley went on. I think the savings ran out around Christmas. That's around when all this house talk really picked up. I didn't put it together until recently. I think she genuinely believes in her mind that if the house situation gets resolved, if Terence's name goes on it, that solves everything. Not just the boat. Everything. It wouldn't have, I said, gently. Even if it had gone through the way she wanted, it wouldn't have solved a job loss she hasn't told her own family about. I know that, Ashley said. Her voice cracked slightly. I think some part of her knows it too. But she's scared, Miss Odessa. She's really scared. Scared people don't always reach for the right rope. I thought about Patrice's words from a few days earlier. A drowning woman doesn't let go of the branch gracefully. She grabs harder. I hadn't known until that call just how literally drowning Deborah Boykin actually was. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Tonight instead of months ago? Because I'm scared too, Ashley admitted. I'm scared that tomorrow destroys my family. I don't know how to stop that. I don't know if I even should, since some of this we brought on ourselves. I just didn't want you walking in tomorrow thinking my mama's a bad person. She's not. She's a scared person who's very good at sounding sure of herself. I understood that distinction more than Ashley probably realised. I've spent my whole life around people who mistake confidence for competence. People who assume the woman speaking quietly in the corner has less to say than the one speaking loudly at the head of the table. Deborah Boykin had built her entire adult life on that confusion. Now the confusion was collapsing all at once, from every direction, in the same season. I don't think your mama's a bad person, Ashley, I said. I think she's a person in trouble who chose the wrong way to solve it. Those are different things, but being in trouble doesn't give anybody the right to take what isn't theirs, or to tell another woman she isn't equipped to hold on to what her own husband built. Your mama did both of those things to me. I have to be honest with you. Tomorrow isn't going to erase that. I understand, Ashley said. I'm not asking you to go easy on her. I just needed somebody in this family to know the whole truth, before it all came apart in that room. I thanked her for telling me. I meant it, deeply. It is a rare and costly thing for a young woman to call her mother-in-law the night before a reckoning, and choose honesty over blood. Before we hung up, she said one more thing that stayed with me longer than almost anything else in this story. Terence married the wrong kind of quiet. Growing up around my mama's kind of loud, she said. I think watching how you actually handle things these past few weeks has shown him the difference. I hope that's not a strange thing to say. It isn't strange at all, I said. It's the truest thing anybody said to me in months. I did not sleep well that night. Not from dread. From something closer to a held breath, finally let out slowly, over hours instead of all at once. The next morning before I picked up Terence, I did one more thing. I drove alone to the parish courthouse, 20 minutes before it opened. I sat in the parking lot with the tackle box on the passenger seat beside me. The same box that had been sitting on Patrice's sideboard for weeks. I wanted to see the original recording myself. Not Ruben's copy. Not the folder Charles kept at home. The actual filed document in the actual county book, with the actual clerk's stamp from December of 1998. The clerk who helped me that morning was a young woman, maybe 30. She pulled the record without much ceremony, the way you'd pull any old file. She set the heavy, leather-bound volume on the counter between us. Here it is, she said, turning the pages carefully. Recorded December 14th, 1998. Instrument number, filing fee, notary seal. Everything's in order. I looked at Charles's signature on that page. Faded but legible. The same signature I'd seen on our wedding certificate, on our mortgage, on every check he'd written me for 31 years of marriage. Ruben's signature was beside it, as notary. Beneath both in smaller print sat a recording clerk's initials, some anonymous public servant, long retired now, or gone. A woman who stamped a piece of paper on an ordinary Monday in 1998. Without ever knowing it, she protected my whole future. I did not cry in that courthouse. I have cried plenty through this story, in kitchens and parking lots and choir pews. It would be easy to think I cried everywhere. I did not cry there, I simply stood very still for a moment. The way you stand in front of something that has quietly held you up longer than you knew. I said, out loud, to nobody but myself in the empty hallway, "Thank you, Charles." Then I closed the book. I thanked the clerk. I drove to pick up my son. What Terence and I talked about in the car mattered more than anything Deborah Boykin would say once we got there. I talked to Ashley last night, he said, before I'd even pulled out of his driveway. She told me about her mama's job, losing it in the fall. She told me too, I said, last night. Same call, I imagine, roughly. Terence was quiet for a block or two, watching the town go by, the same streets he'd grown up on, past the diner where Charles used to take him for pancakes, past the church where he'd been baptised. "I feel sick about all of it," he finally said. "Not just the locks. The whole thing. I let a scared woman talk me into becoming a person who'd do that to his own mother." "You're not that person," I said. "Not all the way through. If you were, you wouldn't feel sick about it right now." "How do I fix it, Mama? After today, however it goes?" I thought about that question for longer than one red light. It deserved a real answer, not a comforting one. "You start by telling the truth in that room today," I said. "All of it. Even the parts that make you look weak. Then you go home tonight. You and Ashley figure out what your marriage actually looks like without her mother deciding things for both of you. And you come see me on Sundays again. Regular. Not because you owe me, because I miss my son." He reached over and took my hand at the next light, the way he used to when he was very small, riding in the passenger seat of a much older car, back when the whole world still felt uncomplicated to him. "I miss being that kind of son," he said. "The kind that calls on Sundays." "Then be him again," I said, "starting today." We drove the rest of the way mostly in silence, the good kind again. When we pulled into the lot and I saw Deborah's truck already parked crooked across 2 spaces, I felt something settle in my chest. Readiness. Not anger, not triumph, just readiness. The particular calm of a woman who has checked every number twice, who knows with total certainty exactly what the ledger says. I had spent 31 years learning how to sit across a table and let the facts arrive in their own time. I'd spent 6 months gathering every fact this story required, and I'd spent 27 years being protected, without even knowing it, by a man who loved me enough to walk into a bank on an ordinary November afternoon. He made sure that whatever storm eventually came, I would already be standing on the solid ground. I got out of the car. I straightened my coat. I walked toward the door Reuben was already holding open for us, ready finally for the room waiting on the other side of it. I want to slow down here. The walk from that parking lot to the conference room was not a long one, but it felt long to me. I think it deserves its own telling. Reuben held the door. Inside, the lobby smelled the way it always had. Cold coffee, floor polish, the particular hum of a building that has processed 38 years of other people's money without ever raising its own voice. A teller I didn't recognize looked up briefly, then back down. A line of 3 customers waited at the counter, none of them paying us any mind. "They're already in the conference room," Reuben said low, walking beside me. "I want you to know something before we go in. I pulled everything last night, cross-checked it twice this morning before you arrived. There is no ambiguity in this file, Odessa. None. I would not let you walk into a room where there was." "I trust you, Reuben," I said. "I have for 38 years. "I know," he said. That's exactly why I wanted to say it out loud. Terence walked a half step behind us, hands in his coat pockets. Quiet in a way I hadn't seen from him since he was a teenager, waiting outside the principal's office. I did not try to fill that silence for him. Some silences are a man's own to carry. Carrying them is part of what makes a person ready for what comes next. We passed a bulletin board near the loan offices, the kind every bank has, pinned with flyers for a home buyer seminar, a scholarship deadline, a faded photograph of last year's employee picnic. I noticed it only because Charles used to point out things like that, small, unremarkable corners of a building. He'd say you could tell a lot about a place by what it bothered to keep on its walls. This one had kept a photograph of Reuben, 20 years younger, holding a plaque for some anniversary of service. I let myself smile at that. Just barely. Just for a second. Then we reached the hallway that led to the conference room. I could hear voices before we got there. Deborah's voice, mostly. Low and urgent. The particular register of someone rehearsing an argument one last time before delivering it. I could not make out the words. I did not try to. Reuben paused at the door, hand on the handle, and looked at me one more time. "Ready?" he asked. I thought, in that moment, about a great many things at once. The way you do right before a door opens. I thought about a Sunday in June, and a $340 error circled in red pencil. I thought about Deborah's voice in my son's backyard. At your age, someone who understands. I thought about a locksmith's drill and a key that didn't turn. An envelope with my name typed instead of written. I thought about Charles, 27 years younger than he'd ever get to be, walking into this very building, quietly deciding that no matter what came for his family after he was gone, it would not come for nothing. "Ready," I said. Reuben opened the door. Tuesday came in cold and clear. The kind of Louisiana winter morning that fools you into thinking spring is closer than it is. I wore my good grey coat. The same one I'd worn to First Delta the Monday after Christmas. I picked Terence up at 8:45. He'd asked, quietly, the night before, if I'd ride with him instead of meeting him there. I think he needed the 10 minutes in the car more than he let on. "You don't have to say anything today," I told him, pulling out of his driveway. "Not one word if you don't want to. What if they ask me something?" "Then you tell the truth," I said. "That's all it ever takes." We got to First Delta at 9. Deborah's truck was already in the lot, parked crooked, across 2 spaces. The way a person parks when they've already decided the meeting is going their way. Ashley's little sedan was beside it. Deshawn's truck was around the side. The boat payment on that truck was 60 days late in November, 90 by January. By that morning, 106. Reuben met us at the door, himself. Grey suit, same steady face he'd worn the day he approved our mortgage 38 years earlier. The hair had gone from black to silver somewhere in between. "Odessa," he said. "Terence." A small nod. Professional. Giving nothing away. The conference room was smaller than I expected. A round table, 6 chairs, a pitcher of water nobody touched. Deborah was already seated, Ashley beside her. Deshawn slouched in the corner chair, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. I would learn later just how true that was. "Odessa," Deborah said, standing halfway up. That same drawn-out delivery of my name. "I didn't realize you'd be joining us." "Terence asked me to come," I said. "I hope that's all right." Of course," she said. Something behind her eyes recalculated in real time. The more family, the better, I always say. I sat. Terence sat beside me. Reuben took the seat at the head of the table. He opened a folder. He did not waste a single word on small talk. "I want to thank everyone for coming in," he said. "Before we get into the refinance application, there's a few things on file I need to walk through. Some of it's routine. Some of it isn't. I'd rather do that now than have any surprises later." "Of course," Deborah said again. She had a particular smile. It widened slightly whenever she felt she was being deferred to. Reuben pulled the first document. "This application, submitted 3 weeks ago, lists the property at 214 Yaupon Street as collateral. Security for a consolidated refinance, meant to cover an outstanding boat loan and an outstanding vehicle loan, both currently in default. The application lists Terence Marchand as sole title holder." "That's correct," Deborah said, before Terence could speak. "It's been in his family for decades. It's practically already his." "It isn't, actually," Reuben said. "Flat, not unkind. Just a man reading a fact off a page. The property at 214 Yaupon Street is titled solely to Odessa Marchand by a survivorship amendment, recorded with Ascension Parish in December of 1998. Terence Marchand has never held a legal ownership interest in this property." Here is what happened to Deborah Boykin's face in that moment, exactly the way I've turned it over in my mind many times since. It did not happen all at once. First her eyebrows moved, a small, confused pull, like she'd misheard a number over a bad phone connection. Then her mouth opened slightly, the beginning of a rebuttal that never fully arrived. Then, slowly, the colour left her cheeks. Then her lips, the way you'd watch a room go dark one lamp at a time. That can't be right, she finally said. Terence told us. Terence believed it too, Reuben said gently. He looked at my son with something almost like mercy. This isn't about anyone lying on purpose. This is a document that's been sitting on file for 27 years. Nobody checked it. That's all that happened here. 27 years, Deborah repeated, like the number itself had personally wronged her. Since 1998, I said. My first word since sitting down. Quiet. Even. My husband recorded it the year after our son turned 10. He never told either of us why exactly. I only learned the full reason myself a few weeks ago. Ashley, beside her mother, had gone very still. I watched her look at Terence. Not with anger, with something closer to fear. The specific fear of a young wife realizing her family has been standing on ground that was never solid. This means, Deborah said, gathering herself, we simply need Odessa's signature. To co-sign, to move forward with the refinance as planned. It's not quite that simple, Reuben said. There's a second issue. The original application listed the property as jointly held between Terence and Odessa Marchand. That representation was not accurate. I've already corrected the file with the lender, but I want to be direct with everyone at this table. An inaccurate collateral representation on a federal loan application is something regulators take seriously. It's already been corrected. Nothing further needs to happen, as long as nothing further is submitted the same way. The room went quiet. Deshawn in the corner had stopped slouching. I didn't fill out that application, Deborah said quickly. Too quickly. I did, Terence said. Every head turned to him. I felt my son's hand resting on the table beside mine, tighten slightly. I filled it out, he said again, steadier this time. Deborah told me what to write. I wrote it because it was easier than saying I didn't actually know whose name was on the deed. That's on me. Not her, not Mama. Me. I want you to understand what that cost him. In a room full of people he'd spent a year trying to impress. I did not say anything. I did not need to. I simply put my hand over his, the way I used to when he was small, and I let him finish. I'm sorry, Mama, he said, not looking at me, looking at the table. I should have asked you first, about all of it. I know, I said. You're asking now. Deborah recovered enough to try one more angle. Well, regardless of the paperwork situation, surely family can come to some arrangement here, Odessa. You wouldn't want to see your own grandchildren's future put at risk. Over a technicality. I looked at her for a long moment before I answered. I felt no anger in that moment, only a kind of tired clarity. The same clarity I feel every time I find a number on a ledger that's been wrong for months, and nobody noticed. Because nobody was really looking. A technicality, I repeated. Is that what you'd call the $62,000 mortgage my husband paid off in 11 years? Before he ever recorded that amendment. Is that what you'd call 31 years of insurance premiums? Tax payments? Repairs I've made on that house? Without anyone asking whether I could afford it? That's not what I meant, Deborah said. I think it is, I said. Still gentle, still even. I think what you meant, back at that cookout and again at Thanksgiving, and again at church asking Pastor Willis about generational wealth, was simple. That the paperwork should belong to someone who understands how these things are supposed to be handled. I remember that sentence very clearly, Deborah. I've thought about it a great deal these past 6 months. The room was silent enough that I could hear the water pitcher sweating onto the table. I understand how these things are handled, I said. I've understood it for 31 years. Reading numbers other people missed. In a job most folks never think twice about. My husband understood it too. That's why he walked into this very building in 1998. He made sure his son would always have a home to come back to. No matter what anybody married into this family decided they were owed. Reuben, to his credit, let the silence sit exactly as long as it needed to. Then he closed the folder gently. The refinance application, as submitted, cannot move forward, he said. Mr. Marchand has no equity in the property to pledge. If Mrs. Marchand wishes to assist the family in some other capacity, that would need to be an entirely separate, voluntary arrangement, made with full information and proper legal counsel for everyone involved. I don't wish to, I said, simply. Not today. Deborah stood up first, and that told you something about her that words alone couldn't. She stood up fast. The chair scraped loud against the floor. For a moment, I thought she might say something sharp, the kind of thing people say when they're cornered. Instead, she looked at Ashley, then at Deshawn. She said it quietly, all the earlier polish gone from her voice. "We need to go home and talk." They left, all three of them. Ashley didn't look back at Terence on the way out. I saw that land on my son's face like a physical thing. Terence and I sat there a moment longer, just the two of us and Reuben. "I don't know what happens now," Terence said. Quiet. "Now," I said, "you go home. You and Ashley talk to each other. Not her mother. You two." "And you?" "I go pick out paint," I said. "That porch rail's needed repainting since before your father passed. I've been putting it off." He almost laughed. It was the first almost laugh I'd heard from him in 6 months. It landed somewhere soft in my chest. The first real relief I'd felt since a locksmith's drill woke me on my own porch 3 months earlier. Reuben walked us both to the door. "Odessa," he said, low, just for me. "Your husband would be proud of how you handled that in there." "He'd be proud I finally used what he built," I said. "That's different from proud of me. But I'll take it." I drove Terence home in silence, mostly. The good kind of silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. When I dropped him off, he leaned back in through the passenger door before closing it. "Mama," he said. The tackle box. "Can I see it sometime?" What Dad wrote. "Whenever you're ready," I said. "It'll be there." He nodded and closed the door. I watched him walk up the driveway, to a house that had never been his. Not on paper, not once. A house that had somehow, through all of it, still managed to hold him the way it was always supposed to. I drove home to Patrice's. That night I slept without dreaming at all. For me, after everything, that felt like its own kind of grace. But the story doesn't end there. Not quite. There were consequences still coming. Some of them mine to give, some of them the world's to deliver on its own. And there was still the matter of the boat and the truck. The family that had bet on a house that was never theirs to bet with. In the weeks after that meeting, the widening mattered as much as the moment itself. The refinance application was formally withdrawn within 3 days. First Delta's compliance department finished its own review of the corrected file. Reuben called to tell me himself. By then I'd mostly stopped expecting bad news. I had started instead simply waiting for the ordinary business of living to resume. The marine lender repossessed Deshawn's boat 2 weeks later. I heard about it from Patrice, same as always. This time she heard it directly from Deshawn himself. He had, in the strange way grief and shame sometimes work, become almost a regular presence at Mount Olive's Wednesday night service. He never explained why he started coming. Nobody asked him to. He simply showed up one evening, sat in the back pew, and kept coming back. I lost the boat, he told me, the 3rd or 4th week he attended. He caught me in the parking lot afterward. Truck's next, probably, unless something changes. But I wanted you to know. I don't blame you for any of it. I put myself in that water. It wasn't your job to pull me out. Nobody's asking you to blame yourself into the ground either, I told him. There's a difference between owning a mistake and drowning in it twice. He nodded. I gave him Pastor Willis's number for the church's small emergency assistance fund. Not because I felt I owed him anything, because I have never believed that justice and mercy have to take turns. Sometimes they can sit at the same table. The truck went the following month. Deborah's husband finally called the lender himself, once the full picture came out. He worked a voluntary surrender, instead of waiting for a repossession crew to show up on Willow Lane, in front of the neighbours. I heard that detail from Reuben. He'd processed paperwork on an unrelated loan that same week, and happened to see the notice cross his desk. He didn't tell me out of spite. He told me because he thought I'd want to know. The family had chosen the quieter way to lose it, rather than the loud one. That's something at least I told him. A little dignity, even in the losing. More than some people manage, Reuben said. Deborah Boykin's job situation came out into the open about a month after the meeting. Not through any effort of mine. A woman cannot keep something that large, hidden forever, in a town the size of Belhaven. Her husband found out first from a former co-worker of hers, at a grocery store checkout line of all places. By all accounts, the conversation that followed at their kitchen table was not a gentle one. I did not gloat over that. It would have been easy to feel something like satisfaction. Watching a woman who'd spent 6 months telling people I wasn't equipped, finally have her own paperwork laid bare in front of her own family. But when it actually happened, I mostly just felt tired on her behalf. Tired the way you feel watching anyone finally run out of road they've been driving with the headlights off. She called me herself eventually, in March, nearly 3 months after Christmas Eve. I almost didn't answer. I'm not ashamed to say that. But something in me, some old habit of finishing what you start, made me pick up. "Odessa," she said. Her voice was different, smaller, not performing anything for once. "I owe you an apology, a real one, not the kind I've been telling myself I already gave you." "I'm listening," I said. "I said things to you I had no right to say," she said. "About your age, about whether you were equipped. I said them because I was scared and ashamed. It was easier to look down on somebody than to look at my own mess honestly. That's not an excuse. I know it's not. But I wanted you to hear me say it plainly, at least once." I sat with that for a moment, the phone warm against my ear, my porch light glowing outside the kitchen window, freshly painted that same soft cream I'd chosen weeks before. "I accept that," I said. "I want you to know I mean that. But I also want you to understand something, Deborah. What you said to me wasn't just about being scared. It was a particular kind of scared. The kind that assumed certain people couldn't possibly have already handled their own business. I've heard that assumption my whole life. In a lot of different rooms, from a lot of different people. I'd ask you to sit with where that assumption comes from. Not just apologise for saying it out loud this once." There was a long pause on her end. "I hear you," she finally said. "I don't know that I have a good answer yet, but I hear you." "That's a start," I said. "It's more than most people manage. We did not become friends after that call. This is not a story about everyone ending up at the same holiday table by the final scene. Some bridges burned all the way to the waterline simply don't rebuild into what they were, but we became civil. Cordial even at the handful of family occasions that still required both of us in the same room. Civil, I have found, at 63 years old, is sometimes its own quiet form of peace. Terence and Ashley separated for 2 months that spring. Not permanently, but long enough for both of them to figure out, on their own, what their marriage actually looked like, without Deborah managing it from the sidelines. They came back together in May. When they did, Terence told me something. They'd agreed together that no future decision about money or family would come from outside their own marriage again. Ashley told her mama that herself, Terence said. He told me the story on my porch one Sunday evening in early June. We were drinking sweet tea in the same chairs Charles and I used to sit in, most evenings after supper. Said it plain. Said, "Mama, I love you, but you don't get a vote in this house anymore." How'd Deborah take it? Not great, Terence admitted. But she took it. I asked him, that same evening, if he'd finally opened the tackle box. It was sitting now in his own hall closet. I'd given it to him formally in April, on the anniversary of Charles's passing. "I read the list 3 times, he said. The one about all the things Dad quietly covered for me. "I didn't know about half of it, Mama. The barbecue loan, the car. I thought I'd gotten away with things nobody noticed." "He noticed everything," I said. "He just decided love looked better quiet than loud." "I want to be like that," Terence said. "For my own kids someday. If Ashley and I get there." "You're already closer than you think," I said. "You told the truth in that conference room, in front of people you wanted to impress." "That's not nothing, Terence. That's actually the hardest part most people never manage." He was quiet for a while after that, watching the porch light flicker, the way it always has, the same fixture Charles installed nearly 40 years earlier, replaced twice since, never moved from its spot beside the door. "There is one more thing, before I close this out, that matters more to me than almost anything else across those 3 long months. The Marchand Hour, the little program Pastor Willis named after me despite my objections, met for the first time on a Thursday evening in February. I expected 6 people, maybe 8 if the weather cooperated. 23 showed up, deeds and wills and old insurance papers tucked under their arms, like offerings brought to an altar. In a way, I suppose they were. Mrs. Odom came and brought her daughter. A young man I didn't recognise came with a shoebox of his late father's paperwork, unopened since the funeral, too afraid to look at it alone. Reuben came, as promised. So did a lawyer named Franklin Boudreau, who attends Mount Olive's early service. In 11 years, he'd never once mentioned he specialised in property and probate law. We sat in the fellowship hall under fluorescent lights. One by one, people laid their paperwork on folding tables. Reuben or Franklin, or sometimes just me, with 31 years of reading fine print, helped them understand what they were actually holding. By April, we'd helped 4 families catch problems before they became crises. A missing beneficiary designation. A deed with a typo that would have caused a probate nightmare for somebody's grandchildren. A woman younger than me who discovered her late husband had never removed his first wife from an old policy. Nobody meant it maliciously. It could have cost her everything, uncaught another decade. It was not just Mrs. Odom either. By March, a second family had come forward, quietly. After hearing about the Marchand Hour through the same church and salon network that had carried Deborah's whispers to me months earlier, a man named Otis Prejean, 71 years old, had almost signed away half interest in his late mother's shotgun house on Willow Lane to a nephew's new wife, a woman he barely knew. She'd shown up at Thanksgiving with a folder of paperwork and a great deal of confidence about how estate matters were typically structured these days. She used almost the exact words Otis told me, sitting across from me at one of our folding tables, Reuben checking the deed beside us. Said I probably wasn't up to speed on how these things get handled anymore. Said it kindly, mind you. But she said it. I did not tell Otis about Deborah, specifically. That was not mine to share, it was not the point. But I told him what I'd come to believe. I'd learned it slowly, watching my own family nearly come apart over a house my husband protected 27 years before anyone needed it. It's not really about you being behind on anything, Otis, I said. It's about somebody assuming you couldn't possibly already be ahead. He nodded slowly. The way a man nods when a stranger finally says, out loud, something he'd felt but never had words for. Reuben confirmed that afternoon that Otis's mother's deed had been properly filed decades earlier. Sole ownership. No ambiguity at all, much like mine. The nephew's wife had simply assumed otherwise. The same way Deborah had assumed otherwise. The same way, I suspect, a great many confident people assume things about patient homeowners who built something slowly, carefully, without ever needing an audience to witness the building. I thought, watching Otis leave that evening, about something Charles used to say. Back when Terence was small, asking constant questions about why we did things a certain way. Quiet doesn't mean unprotected, Charles told him once. I remember it clearly because Terence repeated the phrase back to me years later. Half joking, the way children do with things their fathers say. It just means somebody already did the work, before anybody needed to see them doing it. I did not fully understand, when Charles first said that, how much work he himself had already quietly done, or how long it would sit, folded and patient, inside a tin box on a closet shelf, waiting for the exact winter it would finally be needed. Spring came fully to Belhaven, azaleas blooming along Yopon Street the way they do every April. I had stopped thinking of the whole ordeal as something done to me. I'd started thinking of it, instead, as something simply revealed, in its proper time. The way a photograph slowly develops, present the whole time on the paper, waiting only for the right chemistry. Pastor Willis asked me that spring to speak briefly at a Sunday service about the Marchand Hour, to explain why it mattered, why people should bring their old paperwork instead of leaving it folded in a drawer, trusting hope instead of documentation. I did not want to speak. I have never been a woman who enjoys a podium. But I stood up that Sunday. My good dress, my silver locks pinned back the way I always wear them. I told the congregation the simplest version of the truth I could manage. Somebody who loves you can protect you long after they're gone, I said, if they take the time to write it down properly while they're here. And somebody who doesn't understand your worth will always assume you haven't thought that far ahead. Don't let either one surprise you. Write it down. Check it twice. Never let a confident voice convince you that you weren't already equipped. I sat back down before the silence in the room could turn into something I'd have to manage. Pastor Willis simply nodded from the pulpit. The choir began the next hymn. Mount Olive went on, the way it always has, one Sunday folding quietly into the next. I did not do any of that to prove Deborah Boykin wrong. I want that clear. I did it because Charles did it for me once quietly, without asking for credit, because I have spent 31 years believing something simple. Doubt is easier to carry when somebody else already carried it first. That's what I nearly didn't have. Standing on my own porch on Christmas Eve, holding a key that no longer fit a lock my husband built with his own 2 hands. I still keep the tackle box most of the year now, at Terence's house, on a shelf in his own hall closet, exactly where mine used to sit. He asked to keep it there. I let him. Some things are meant to travel forward, into the next set of hands ready to carry them. But there is one thing I kept for myself. The small brass key that came in that plain white envelope in December. The one with no note. It sits now on my own dish by my own front door, next to my house key, and the spare to my car. Every morning I walk past it, out to a porch rail painted soft cream, and the key just sits there, catching the light. I never got loud, I just kept the key,